A former US Army engineer is facing multiple charges of spying for Israel. The 84-year-old is accused of handing over information on nuclear weapons and air defense. It's not the first time Israel's been accused of spying on the US. So how damaging is this for the two strong allies? And can Washington do anything but forgive and forget? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Darren Jordan. Well, he's an 84-year-old American charged with spying for the Israelis and giving them top-secret information almost 25 years ago. Ben Ami Kadish, a former US Army engineer, was arrested on Tuesday. He's being charged with conspiracy, and the FBI says he's confessed to giving information about US nuclear weapons, fighter jets and missiles. If convicted, Kadish could receive life in prison or even the death sentence. Prosecutors say Kadish worked at the same time as Jonathan Pollard, an American who was convicted of spying for Israel back in 1985. The men allegedly had the same handler, an intelligence officer serving undercover as attaché in Israel's New York consulate. After Pollard's case, Israel shut down that office and promised Washington it wouldn't conduct intelligence activity in the US. But with this latest arrest, the case is creating questions about whether or not there are more Americans still spying for Israel. Well, on Wednesday, State Department spokesman Tom Casey said Israel and the US maintain close ties, but rebuked the alleged activities.
We believe, though, that we have a good, friendly relationship with the State of Israel, and certainly, again, as I said, these kinds of activities, whether they occurred long in the past or occur present day, are not the kinds of actions we would expect from a friend and ally, and we would expect that Israel would not be engaging in such activities.
Well, joining us now are our guests in Tel Aviv, Alon Pinkas, former Israeli Consul General in New York; in London, David Shayler, former British intelligence agent; and in San Francisco, Stephen Zunes, Professor of Politics and Chair of Middle East Studies at the University of San Francisco. Gentlemen, welcome all to the programme. Alon Pinkas in Tel Aviv, let me start with you, if I may. I mean, this certainly isn't the first time that Israel's been accused of spying on its good friend, the US. Does Israel still have spies working in the US, as this case seems to suggest?
No, not to the best of my knowledge, Darren. Israel, as a matter of policy and principle, has refrained from spying in the U.S. or on the U.S. Occasionally, there are cases of borderline industrial espionage, which obviously have nothing to do with state matters or matters of international relations. There was a major case in 1985, that of, obviously, as you know, Jonathan Pollard. And now there's this new case, which, according to the indictment, according to the paperwork supplied by the American Department of Justice, rather, another Israeli spy, or another American, rather, who had spied for Israel, who allegedly did that between the years of 1979 to 1985. Definitely after 1985, and I'm being cautious, I'm saying to the best of my professional and personal knowledge, there has not been a case since 1985, and very few, if any, before these two cases. OK,
let's put that point to Stephen Zunes there in San Francisco. Stephen Zunes, why does a country like Israel need to spy on its closest ally, the US? And is the risk worth the intelligence gains?
It doesn't seem to make sense on the surface. After all, the last thing that Israel wants to do, particularly given its raison d'etre as a safe haven for the Jewish people, is to encourage the kind of anti-Semitic stereotype that American Jews have dual loyalty and that their real loyalty is to the state of Israel. And recruiting American Jews for ideological reasons to do this kind of espionage doesn't seem very smart, particularly since there is such an enormous amount of strategic cooperation between the two countries already. At the same time, both countries are always looking after their self-interest, despite all the talk about their great ideological and moral affinity towards each other, and all the talk about the supposed power of the pro-Israel lobby. When push comes to shove, each country is after their own narrowly defined strategic self-interest. 95% of the time they coincide, but there are times when they may have some differences, and that's when you find situations where there's potential espionage.
OK, well, we'll explore that point a little bit later in the programme. Let's bring in David Shaler in London into the discussion. David Shaler, you've worked in the intelligence community. I mean, how do US intelligence agencies view Israel? Is it just another country willing to obtain sensitive information by any means, even espionage?
Well, Britain and America are very suspicious of Israel. For example, in the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher, then the Prime Minister of Britain, had to effectively kick Mossad out of Britain because they were doing what was known as undeclared or illegal intelligence operations. That's those intelligence operations done without the say-so of the Home Service. And when I was in the services, there was an unofficial Mossad officer in Britain, this is in the 1990s, who was going around threatening Palestinian dissidents, and he was kicked out on the quiet. So the problem with many of these things is stuff is done behind the scenes. It's not often that the world of spying actually spills out like this publicly and we get somebody actually charged with something. But the problem at core is that Mossad is not a democratically accountable organisation. Mossad was actually set up by the Rothschilds long before the inception of the State of Israel. And the agreement between the Rothschilds and Israel was that Israel would pay for Mossad's activities as long as the Rothschilds carried on getting the intelligence. Now, the Rothschilds are linked to the international banking industry. And of course, war is very good for bankers because they back both sides. They lose the money they lend to the side that loses, but the side that wins pays back over years and years and years. And this happened in Europe 200 years ago, where wars were virtually invented in order to make the Rothschilds wealthier.
All right, well, let's bring in back Alan Pincus into the discussion here there in Tel Aviv. I mean, Stephen Zunes made a very good point there. I mean, why would Israel, a country that enjoys a very special relationship with the US, risk that position, resort to spying, whilst it receives more than $2 billion in military aid every year and state-of-the-art technology that it probably would have received anyway?
I agree 100% with the point he made, the one that you just repeated. It is by any measure, both politically and strategically, as well as ideologically, a silly, imprudent, and short-sighted decision that to spy in the U.S. when that decision is being made. I think it puts American Jews in an almost impossible predicament when their allegiances and loyalties are being questioned. I think in the end, whatever information is obtained by those alleged spies is not worth the risk of being caught, not to mention being suspected constantly by the American intelligence community. And I think that the first Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, instructed at the time that no Jew will ever be used as a spy against the country in which he resides, and ergo, Israel will not engage in any acts of espionage in the U.S. as well as elsewhere. And the same dictum, the same policy principle was again repeated or expounded by Prime Minister Shimon Peres, at the time Prime Minister Shimon Peres in 1985 after the Pollard affair. A short answer to your very concise question. Israel should not be engaged in this. Israel has very little to gain and tremendously a lot to lose. OK, you touched there on a very interesting point, which I want to put to Stephen Zunes about the issue of loyalty. It's understood that this man, Kadish, didn't receive payments for his spying. But what does this tell us about the issue of loyalty of US citizens of Israeli origin? I mean, Jonathan Pollard was also an American Israeli. Do they do it for the love of Israel?
Well, certainly you'll find people who are put Israel first. I would say that even though a majority of American Jews on one level, at least broadly define themselves as Zionist, only a tiny, tiny minority would put loyalty to the state of Israel above loyalty to the United States. Nevertheless, there are at least some who are willing to do this, and the Israelis are able to find them and recruit them, apparently. Just as we have found during the Cold War, there are some people who sold secrets to the Soviets for money, but there are also a small number of American communists who are willing to do spying for largely ideological reasons.
David Shaler in London, I mean, many experts say that Jonathan Pollard wasn't the only Israeli spy working in the US at the time. He just, of course, had the misfortune to get caught. But, I mean, how deep and entrenched do you think the Israeli spy operation is in the US? Are we likely to see more spies unearthed, perhaps?
I can't say whether we're going to see more spies on Earth, because generally speaking what happens in these situations is things are sorted out behind the scenes. Things are done very quietly. It's rare that the intelligence services will go public and seek to actually prosecute somebody, because in some ways it's an embarrassment to actually admit that they've had a spy within their midst. But the real problem in the world is not to do with the loyalty of American Jews to the US or to Israel. The problem is the more than $2 billion aid that the US gives Israel to spend purely on defense. Now, the reason Israel still spies on America is because it believes that America's not giving it the most modern hardware it has. And it wants that modern hardware so Israel itself can hold the rest of the Middle East to ransom. And that, of course, would be extremely undesirable in terms of geopolitics. So at the moment, America does exert some influence over Israel in terms of the technology it lets Israel have. But you have to bear in mind that it's the American armaments industry who are behind the support for Israel, because, as I say, the subsidy from the American government is not to help the people of Israel, it's simply to spend on arms.
Stephen Zunes, I want to ask you a quick question before we go to our break. I mean, are military espionage and a strategic military alliance very separate issues? I mean, how contradictory are they? Because there's no friendship when it comes to spying, is there?
No, but at the same time, when you have Israel dependent so much on American hardware, and when the United States occasionally puts restrictions on what they can do with it, or when they use American technology, for example, in their own arms industry. Remember, Israel is not just a major importer of arms, but also a major exporter of arms. You know, sometimes they may be missing a few pieces that they would find useful for one reason or another. So in certain ways, having such close strategic cooperation, indeed one could argue dependency on the United States, might in certain ways prompt Israel to do more spying than they might otherwise do to pick up some of the technology they may be missing.
OK, gentlemen, stay with us, won't you? Because it's time for a short break now. But when we come back, is this spy case really going to damage the relationship between Israel and the US? And what's really behind the case? More on that. Stay with us.